welcome to another episode of Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me, as always, is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing very well, Jody. I'm excited because we have a guest here with us, and I don't know about you, Jody, but I feel like I'm going to learn a lot today because we have with us Andrew Mee. So he's going to talk a lot about MIDI 2.0 and let us know what's going on with that. So welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Sweet.
Excellent.
We're happy to have you on. We feel like this is probably going to be something of like a PhD lesson in MIDI 2.0. Hopefully, anyway.
Well, I hope so. Hopefully we can do it at different levels so everyone can understand.
Sure.
For those of you who don't know Andrew, that didn't have the privilege of meeting you at, let's say, Winter NAMM, that was just happening. Maybe you can give us a little bit of your background, Andrew, and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I have one of those kind of the many roles, really. So most of my work is within the MIDI Association. I'm actually sponsored by Yamaha to be there. They spend money on me to be there to make sure that we get this right. Effectively, the two roles that I have in the association that most people might know me by is I'm the Developer Support Working Group Chair, which that role is I reach out to various developers who are working on MIDI 2. I try and help them as much as I can with their projects, encourage them to undertake it, why they should undertake it, how that's going to end up being beneficial to them. And then the other part of my role is I'm one of the Technical Standards Board's representatives, which means is that within the MIDI Association, there's a couple of different groups. The TSB, as it's colloquially called, is there to make sure that the standards are actually of good standing and that they actually work, and then we kind of argue. So the different working groups kind of work on those. Yeah, I know. The working groups are there to kind of put the standards together, and then it comes to the TSB, and then the TSB kind of has that final say before we send it out for a vote to the various members. So I started that in 2018, not in those positions, obviously. Long story short, but I was bored at home. I put some code up on GitHub for how to describe MIDI devices using JSON, which is a standard sort of language to describe how information should put together. Uh-huh. Put that up, didn't think much of it, and then I had Athan Bilius from Yamaha. He reached out to me and he said, "Oh, you're doing something that we're about 2 years away from, and you're a couple of years ahead. What do you think?" And I went, and I'm sitting at home here. I mean, for those who don't know, I'm based in Australia. There's not a huge MIDI developer community here. It's very small. 10,000, 11,000 kilometers away from where a lot of activity happens. And I'm going, who is this person? It's great that they reached out to me. I sort of like dancing around the lounge room going, oh my God, Yamaha's reached out to me. And my son, of course, is looking at me very strangely going, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing? Anyway, so of course I just went, yeah, great. That sounds really good. And they were really, really nice. And they said, look, we're looking at this stuff. What do you think based on all the sort of research that you had done? And so I sat down and wrote a big long-winded essay to them about what they should do. And they said, oh, look, come along and join in a couple of meetings. And so from there, it's just started from there. And the thing that I was working on, and we'll probably talk more about that later, was a thing called Property Exchange. And that's where I started. And then I just started getting involved with everything else. And now it's my full-time gig. A different shift from the industry that I was working in.
And what was that?
Business software.
Okay.
Coming from the very sort of, there's a lot of overlap, believe it or not, in terms of you've got to make sure that the data is actually right. And when you're talking about MIDI, you're talking about a lot of data, and you don't want to get things wrong, and you want to have things that interoperate between different devices. You want everyone to kind of work together.
That would be ideal.
Yeah, so that's where my background comes from. And my background is very nerdy and writing things like APIs and that side of things. So I'm a musician in the sense that I play around with things at home, and it's good because I come from that sort of angle of I'm your home hobbyist musician who can't play music very well, should never play it publicly. Unless it's to a select audience of family members who will nod appreciatively. at least it's that background of coming at it from a sort of fresh set of eyes going, look, how can we actually make this really good for the musician? It's good because I don't tend to get involved with things like product development, things like that. I've got that almost separation to kind of look at it from the user's perspective. What's really good and what's going to work for a user.
So does that mean that things will be easier going forward, or more in depth is the question that I would have with that, being that you're helping to define what a large number of musicians will end up using, and you're saying you're very much a hobbyist.
It's both. I think the point is that for a musician of any level, it should be easier. You shouldn't be dealing with all of the fine-grained stuff that you have to deal with. That takes away from the joy of actually writing music, right? If you've got to sit there and set all this MIDI mapping up, and you guys were talking about this with doing drum maps and stuff like that the other week.
Ridiculous.
And I'm listening going, oh my God, I can hear the headache forming, right? How are you going to enjoy doing this if you've got to spend so much time getting it right?
Exactly.
But the truth is that it's more complicated, but the complication is moved from the musician and onto the developers of the product.
Yay.
Right. Where it should be.
Yes.
And it should be set in such a way that the musician doesn't have to think. Look, there's always teething pain. Do you remember when USB was first introduced?
Yes.
It was plug in, fuck up, throw away, rip out, throw away, right? That was what everyone used to say,
Right.
But nowadays, you don't even think about your USB devices. You plug them in, you expect them to work.
Yes.
Yep.
Right? You go, I've plugged in an audio unit, it appears, I suddenly have so many channels in and out. I go to my DAW, there it is. And then I think about the mouse and it's got all the extra buttons, and I don't have to really think about that. The software, I can map it if I want to. When was the last time you really had to think about it? That's the point. And we want to try and get to that with your music gear, to not have to constantly think about how should I be working with it in a technical sense and how am I going to play?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I can speak to that a little bit because back in early 2000, something like that, I got a new controller keyboard for my setup. I was just upgrading from what I used to have as a controller. It has a bunch of sliders and knobs and everything, and I think this is going to be awesome. I'm going to assign everything to my channel strips in Logic, and I'm going to be able to do so much stuff with it. Well, that sounds awesome in theory, except when you try to map all that kind of stuff in Logic, at that point, it was like pulling teeth. It was like, this is not working the way I expected it to work. It was fiddly. It was cumbersome. Ultimately, I gave up that workflow. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I haven't gone back and tried to do it again with the same piece of gear as my knowledge gets better. But it was such a laborious thing. And I know that after that time, there's been several developers like Novation and things that have these things that are coming out that are sort of like pre-mapped. I haven't really tried working with any of that, basically because I haven't had to. But the thing that I think it falls on a lot of times is not necessarily on the developers, but there's so many moving parts. And how are you going to account for all of these things and implement them in a practical way in the software?
If we go with the route of you mentioning the episode of drum editing and all that, I had recorded several albums using V-drums with drummers coming into play in the studio and such. I captured all the data, but at the time I actually did the mixes originally, there was no really usable plugins, especially for drums, that could even deal with all that data. And unfortunately, the Roland V-drum head didn't sound great. That's the reality. Now I'm remixing all of that stuff. Nobody could answer the simple question of what is this particular controller information doing? Even though I had it all saved, the one that I knew was the foot controller information for the foot on the hi-hat. And just about every drum plugin deals with that. There's separate information that is General 1 and I believe General 2 that come out of the Roland head. And General 1 tells the snare drum where on the snare drum head it was hit. And General 2, I think it is, tells where on the ride cymbal it was hit. if I'm not mistaken. Now, I don't know going forward in 2.0 if they're going to have that same type of thing, but I only just discovered that Logic Drums is the first drum setup for samples that I know of that even reads General 1. It doesn't read General 2, but it does read General 1. And on the Charlie Clouser interview, he just learned that because I had just learned it that day.
And that made you a very happy camper.
Sure.
Can I tell you something with this? Because when I was listening to this, and because I knew what was happening in the background. So one of the things that we're working on is a thing called profiles. And what a profile does is exactly what you want. I am a drum module, and you're a drum set of information. Maybe it's a drum kit or whatever, but we're both drums. Let's work in the same way. Let's make sure we have our drum map on the same notes. Right. Let's make sure that the control messages are the same messages for the same functionality, right? If you want to think about this in terms of your pain, all of this data, it's going to be a nightmare to go through, right? It's time. And we don't have a huge amount of time. It's something we don't want to be wasting. But the point of this whole sort of profiles is that you can just say, right, let's turn on the profile, and we know that these things are going to work the same way.
Wow.
And that is one of the big things. Now, we've just released a whole bunch of different profiles for general MIDI, which I know sounds really strange, but there's also things like we've done one for MPE, we've just done one for drawbar organ and a rotary speaker setup. But in the background, we're doing one for piano and we're doing one for drums. The drums ones has just started. We'll make no promises about what it would look like or when it's going to be released. But the point is we have things like what you're talking about, which is that these plugins and these hardware manufacturers, and they're all working in isolation, right? The joy of the MIDI Association is we're trying to get people to come together and say, look, let's make sure this works for people. We want people to buy your stuff, I mean, at the end of the day, but we want them to go, look, I'm using it with this, but I'm also using it with that. Sorry, I want to jump back to something you were saying, Chris, about going through all this effort to set up this controller for Logic. The bigger problem you've also got is when you go, well, I want to stop using Logic and I want to use a different DAW. And suddenly you go, well, I've done all that work in Logic. I can't possibly go somewhere else, right? Or you've got someone who comes into your studio who's got, well, I've got a session written in something in Sonar or whatever it is. You want to be able to go, well, I've got this controller. It's a really great DAW controller. And I want to make sure it works. I don't want to be spending hours and hours and hours resetting up what everyone else is already setting up in the same way 99% of the time. So the joy of this whole sort of concept of profiles is to A, turn around and talk to the other device and say, hey, what are you? For a start, I'm a controller keyboard that supports the DAW control profile, or I'm a controller keyboard that supports the piano profile. And then for something like your DAW to turn around and go, well, I want you in this mode because that's going to suit what you're working on right this moment. Right. And that should be silent for the user, right?
That sounds
the user
great.
Can be, right? It takes a long time to develop this stuff. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's been going on. We did the first announcement
years
in
at this
2020.
point.
Yeah, I do a lot of work. So do a lot of other people in the association. Everyone is technically volunteer within the association. We have meetings all the time, and these things take time because it's really about a passionate debate about how can we best serve the musicians, right? There's always differing opinions about that, but at the end of the day, they're hammered out, and we do a lot of prototyping, so it takes time to make sure these things work. But with the DAW, we're all going to meet up a couple of days before Super Booth with a whole bunch of different people, different manufacturers, different companies, because they're all saying the same thing. We've got companies that make DAW controllers go, look, we want a standard way to work. We want to know how do we do things like display the current plugin that's been highlighted on our little device to make it really easy for the person without having to write something specifically for Logic, specifically for Cubase, specifically for Bitwig. What can we do? As an industry, it's well aware the things that are missing. This is the positive side of MIDI 2. Just please be patient. This is why.
Yeah.
We want it now.
Yeah.
We want it now.
No, I mean,
Come on.
it's one thing. I think people, if they get impatient with, oh, we've heard about this for 15 years, why are we not hearing more? To take a step back and look at the scope of what actually has to happen. All of these manufacturers, competitors, essentially. I read a quote by, somebody you mentioned, Ethan Billias, right? When he's talking about they're competitors in the industry, but they're choosing to come together to come up with this one format, right? And of course, you get more than a few people in a room, everybody's going to have a differing opinion of how to implement something because whatever they think is obviously the best, right? But then having to navigate those waters and actually come up with something that is usable, that everybody can agree on. That's going to take time. Anybody that's tried to get a few people to agree on something should realize that, try to get a singer to commit to no, this is how much reverb I want on the vocal, right? Can be tricky. Now, do this on a billion-dollar scale, I'm sure.
Quickly on that, that's really interesting talking about this cooperation and competition thing because within the MIDI Association, one of the things that we had to go to and do, and part of the delay has been working with operating systems. I have to say, it is interesting sitting in a room, and I've been in a couple of these meetings, where you've got literally people, the top MIDI people from Apple and Microsoft and remotely the Linux guys and Google, all sitting in a room going, how best can we serve people? Which you try getting those companies or those operating systems sitting in any room together,
right,
and trying to do the best thing is crazy. We had a meeting in Redmond not that long ago, and it was all those people from the different companies sitting in a room together. We did one in Tokyo as well, which at Apple, and it was that same thing where it's that real cooperation. And they're really lovely people. I have to say, they're the nicest people. But everyone just puts their competition to the side and just goes, look, let's make the best thing.
And we'll beat you to making the best things.
Yeah. Separately, that probably does happen.
Right.
But that's also been a big part of why things have been slow because OSs take a long time to be ready. They work in very slow movements to try and get all these things. And the difference is that they're really trying to do it properly, which they've got all of their own internal processes, which I get impatient for, but that's because I don't have to work in them, right?
Right. Yeah. Thinking about MIDI 2.0 here, what's eventually coming out and going to be the new standard sort of protocol, right? And I mentioned this, I think, or we mentioned it in the podcast when we talked about MIDI. It's such an ingrained thing at this point that we kind of take it for granted what it actually is doing. Certainly the last 10, 15 years, you said, it's just a USB cable, as opposed to having racks of MIDI interfaces, make sure they talk to each other, and now it's just seamless. I wonder if some people have perhaps a hard time imagining, I know I probably do, what 2.0 actually will allow us to do. And do you think it's going to be a similar sort of revolution or evolution in music technology as MIDI 1.0 was when it came in? And if so, it's the second part of this, because I wasn't big enough, right? But it would be, what do you think those biggest implementations are going to be?
Part of the problem with MIDI 2 is that MIDI 1 is so successful.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. And it's really funny because you talk about that everyone doesn't think about what they're using. I mean, we have conversations with people that go, I don't use MIDI anymore. I just use a controller keyboard. And I'm like,
and how does it get
I
that
don't
info?
fault them on this, right? And it's like, but it's MIDI over USB. And they're like, oh, is it? I don't even think about it.
Right.
The two biggest areas, and this is, what we talk about a lot, the two biggest improvements, and I think it's going to be evolution, and the main reason it's going to be evolution is because MIDI 2 is backwards compatible. So if you've got a MIDI 1 device, your MIDI 2 application is still going to work with your MIDI 1 device, your MIDI 1 device, and vice versa, right? It's going to be one of those things where what the companies are doing is putting in small features into their MIDI device that's MIDI 2, right? They're not going to suddenly burst out in the scene and say, well, here's a MIDI 2 only device. That A, doesn't really exist, but B, it doesn't serve anybody properly. And so I think it's this gradual evolution that's going to happen. The two things people are going to really notice. One is this bidirectional communication, right? So MIDI 1, yes, if you put an in and an out, it's bidirectional, but it's generally not really part of the transport. You can literally go from keyboard to module to module to module or whatever, and there's no real feedback loop of what's actually happening. That's kind of gone away. And so now we have this it's gone from a monologue to a dialogue. So this whole idea that your device, be it a sound module or whatever else, controller keyboard, is talking in two directions. And the point of that is that you have a lot more ability to then say, well, what are you doing? What do you have? How can we work together properly? And doing that in a standard way. So the software maybe it's software, for example, talking to a hardware unit. And it goes, look, what are you? I'm this kind of hardware unit. I have these controllers, I have these channels, I have this information you can know about me. And then it can go, oh, okay, well, I know how to process all of that because it's given to me in a standard way. And I go, yep. So this software technically has to know nothing about that device, but it doesn't have to have any pre-knowledge about that device. If you can imagine, the software doesn't actually need to know anything about that device. It doesn't need to have pre-installed plugins, particularly for a software or whatever. This is the idea that we're driving at. You're not having to do any of that pre-configuration of controllers. You can just, even if it's something where it doesn't get covered by a profile. We have two aspects, and I'll break this down a little bit. We've got profiles, which is I was talking about before, which is you're this device, I'm this device. We're going to use a common set of parameters that are predefined as part of the standard. Okay, that's fine. The other one is property exchange, and the two can work together. Property exchange is using JSON over sysx to interrogate the device and know how that device works. And the way that it does that is there are some defined exchanges, things like give us a list of your channels, and then off each channel it might be give me a list of your program list. And there's defined ways that I know that I can work with that, which is what we call MIDI association or RMA defined resource. Then secondly to that, you can have your manufacturer defined resources. But because things work in a particular way, which is all documented, I've got demos that I did a couple of years ago where I had a little tiny Arduino based synthesizer, right? Just
Okay.
We're talking about 96K of RAM for those that are watching it, playing at home. And on that, I could connect to that using the standard messaging, again, not knowing anything about what it does, how it works. I could tell that it had a single channel, that it had a certain list of CC messages that are available. And by the way, let's pull up the documentation of that device. So the user could just go, oh, well, I want to know how it works. Here's the manual coming off the device. Why not at the same time provide a UI interface? It gives you all the oscillator levels and the mod matrix and all the rest of it straight off the device. Now, the beauty about that sort of dialogue thing is that it will work over existing MIDI 1 transports.
Wow.
So we had this working over 5-pin DIN, right? It's a concept. It was to prove a point. Right. And so we had a test application, had no idea, could interrogate the device. It had full control of the device. It knew everything that it needed to know about that device. So if you then put that in context of the future and what we could possibly do is you're looking at things like you got a DAW. It interrogates the list of MIDI devices that you've got connected. It knows pretty much what they all do. And then it can actually auto-generate a session. All right, well, I'm going to generate this track, this track, this track, this track. And on the track, you could literally just go click. Oh, and there's the interface for that hardware device. Done.
Wow.
Here's the controllers. They're all in the
automation lanes and stuff.
Automation lanes,
Right.
Thank you. So it's all in the automation lanes. You don't do anything else. It's done. And then that's all recorded. And I need the patch list. I need the list of programs. Oh, I click that. Okay, here's all the programs. It just comes up automatically. The other part
What
of
a
that,
amount of savings I would have had in creating an environment for Logic just to record all of the V-drum data. Holy cow.
so the other side of that is imagine you then go, look, this keyboard or synth or whatever, it gets used in a whole bunch of different things. And I'm going to take a snapshot of that device, what we call a state, get a state of it, like a snapshot. And I'm going to store that with my session. And so when my session loads, it can turn around and say, I'm going to restore the state for the session for that device.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Even better.
Yeah.
The thing is, this is nothing new, right? Because if you think about it, this is exactly what's been in all your plugins for how long?
Right.
Plugins work like this right now. You should be able to, and again, this is the future,
Right.
do this with your hardware devices as well, including your controller keyboards or your V-drum setups or whatever you wanted, right? The point is that you should be able to just treat it the same way that you treat your plugins. Right?
That's
So that's
crazy.
one side of the that's one side of the coin. There's a little bit of an extra side to this, and I'm going to, which is, I know I keep sidetracking because there's so many benefits. One of the benefits of that kind of control and information is it's actually an accessibility helper. So if you're thinking about the fact that this is all coming over standard JSON, which is just text format, there's no reason that you couldn't have something for low vision or blind users or whatever, being able to go, I need a screen reader that talks to a hardware synth. So if you've bought your wonderful FM synth with very little knobs, right?
Yeah.
And certainly, the knobs are multi-function or they have a big whopping screen on it, which is fine. And there's some great stories about people being taught exactly where to press on the screen at what time to get something to work.
Mm-hmm.
You could actually have something that sits in the middle that actually then allows people to talk to electronic gear so that they can manage it, maintain it, program it without having to rely on a screen.
Wow.
Right? So this is this sort of extra benefit that we're actually discovering that was kind of a little bit considered, but not really. It was sort of like, oh yeah. And so within the MIDI Association now, there's a music accessibility working group. They're actually doing a whole bunch of other stuff to do with music accessibility, but this is kind of one of the things that are coming out of this kind of MIDI 2 discoverability, which is under the heading of MIDI capability inquiry, if you really want to know. But the point is that there's all this benefit. It means that the same way that everyone can just pick up a guitar and start playing,
In perfect
because they can
world.
feel where they're going.
Yeah.
Well, they may not do it well, but at least they can, they can pick it up.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't have to have all these things. The problem with electronic music equipment is a lot of it's screen-based, or it's very visual, or there are some pieces of equipment that have got knob per function. That's great. But then you hit the shift key and they're no longer that knob per function. You can actually have helpers that help them manage that. Someone out there is going to write that product and it's going to do very, very well.
Right.
Because you suddenly open up a whole market.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of ways to actually help and introduce people to things that they couldn't do prior.
Catch myself thinking here as you're describing this, and it's the original idea might be to help people that are visually impaired, but it doesn't mean that doesn't make it easier for anybody else as well. Because now if I just want to talk to my synth to have it do what I want it to do.
That's right. And if you start looking at things like the new machine learning and all the AI stuff that's coming out, how it's not much of a leap to make the jump.
Right. You mentioned the machine learning and things where there was, I want to say it was a plugin. I'm pretty sure it was a plugin where you would just specify, there weren't necessarily patches. You would just ask it, pull up a piano with lots of reverb or whatever. And boom, there's the preset, right? Going into what you're just talking about, now you're just saying that instead. And it pulls it up on your, I guess, in your hardware synth as well, right? That's pretty remarkable.
Well, even if you were learning, you also think about things like learning the synth.
Sure.
I mean, I've bought more synths than I probably should have, and half the time, again, limited time, and I probably sometimes don't give them the justification of the time to spend on it. Right. But imagine if it was one of those things where as I'm moving something, maybe it's telling me what I'm doing, or maybe it's saying, look, you're new to this, do you need some help? And that's in my DAW.
Don't do that, Chris. Don't do that. Don't turn that knob.
Yeah, well, yeah. But okay, so here's a good one for you actually on this one. So one of the things that we put in there, and it sounds so simple, was a property exchange resource to tell the computer or whatever whether you have local on turned on or off. And you go, oh, that's such a minor thing. Surely everyone knows that. You'd be surprised of just how expensive support calls are based on whether people have that turned off accidentally and turn around and go, my keyboard doesn't make any noise.
Yeah.
Right? I'm hitting the keys and nothing's happening. People who have been in the industry for, I don't know, 20 years go, oh, my local on's off. You know, I'll fix that up. I know what's going on there. But all these people who have literally gone to the local electronics store, bought themselves a home organ, and suddenly they return it because the keyboard doesn't work. Right?
Oh, jeez.
But instead you could turn around, have it plugged into the support page. Suddenly it goes, oh, look, we're doing diagnostic. We've noticed that your keyboard is not turned on. Would you like us to turn it on? Oh, yeah, right. This can all happen automatically.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, did that fix the problem? Yes. That would likely, certainly in larger organizations, probably save tens of thousands of dollars in support, maybe more.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It would also negate our very first episode.
That was a know your own gear. Not know your own gear.
Own gear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. I mean, it's easy to sort of sit here and laugh at that concept, but probably 90% of the people are listening to this podcast have probably been sitting and intently listening to an EQ that's bypassed in their mix. You know, we're sitting there and you go
Why
like,
is it not changing anything?
No, it's like, oh, we're even worse. Like, oh, I can really hear it when I bring up that 12K, right? Oh, it's in bypass, you know. So those things do happen, but it's another implementation that certainly I wouldn't have thought about, but I guess that's why we have people like you.
Look, there's lots of benefits, and I think we won't know what all the benefits are until 5-10 years.
Right.
I think what we will find is it's one thing for me to sit there as a tech person and go, oh, look, we can do all these things. Someone's going to do something which is just going to be that killer application where everyone goes, oh, God, I wish I thought of that first.
Right.
Because that happens.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
All the time. And you're sitting there going, Dad damn it, I wish I'd been that person who thought of that. But that side of that whole discoverability and understanding your device is one. So I know going back to you asked me about the things that would be really going to help with MIDI too. That's one side of things. The other thing is going to be playability and expressibility. If you think about the history of MIDI 1, it's all what we talked about was 7-bit values. So you have 0 to 128, which has been fine for 40 years and is probably fine for a lot of music. What you are now getting to now is people really need more resolution. And also things like per note controllers. So we had MIDI 1, and then, I don't know, I can't think how many years ago it was now, this thing called MPE came out, right? Okay. And what MPE allowed you to do, which seems simple in practice, was to have more expressibility when you're playing. Mm-hmm. What do you know?
Are we talking about aftertouch and things like that? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, MPE has your aftertouch and it has a pitch bend across the keys. So this is things like your Rolly C boards and the KMIs that I've got behind me and stuff like that. And you can watch Jordan Rudess play a whole bunch of stuff using MPE and it sounds amazing. Because, I mean, everything he touches sounds amazing, but that's a whole different thing, right? But the Osmos that's just come out and all of these things where what you're getting is there's people who go, look, yes, I can play piano and for piano, that's fine. But when I'm doing something that's just a little bit more, I want to have that expressibility. It's the same thing when we talk about even in MIDI guitars. You want to be able to bend every string, right, as you're playing. So if you're thinking about the fact that you've got this expressibility, so MPE comes out and it says, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have a channel rotation. Instead of everything being on one channel, it's like, let's take up 8 channels and each one of those is going to be the last note that we play, or there's a couple of different ways that it works, but generally, and then what happens is I can wiggle the keys a little bit or I can pitch bend just that one key up the whole keyboard. So it's what we call per note controllers. right? We had that with key aftertouch. That was it. That was the only one you had. And so MIDI 1 kind of reached where it could go. And so MPE came out, and that's fine. But then, of course, it takes up all these different channels when most people are limited to 16 channels, right? So you usually don't have an MPE device on the same MIDI 1 port as you might have a multi-timbral synth or something. There's these kind of limitations that you kind of work around. But it was really interesting because it really did show that there is a drive to have this kind of expressibility. When they designed the new format for MIDI 2, which is called the UMP format, confusingly enough, and there are reasons why this is, MIDI 2 falls on two categories. One is what we call MIDI CI, which is what I was talking about with discoverability, and one's called Universal MIDI Packet, or UMP, which is the new higher resolution format, right? That higher resolution is backwards compatible. So you start in a sort of MIDI 1 mode, then you can sort of update to a MIDI 2 mode, MIDI 2 protocol mode. But now your resolutions are much, much higher. CC messages are 32-bit as opposed to being 7-bit. So as opposed to 127 steps, you've now got 4.2 billion, which is ridiculous. But if you start to think about the fact that people were complaining about stepping and they it's more analog than analog. The point about this whole concept is to make sure that that goes away. And there was a really great demo years and years ago, and it was not for a musical instrument, it was for a mixing desk slider.
Right.
Roland did this demo, and they had two sliders in a box from the hardware. And they said, all right, let's watch it go up in MIDI 1 increments. And you could literally see this slider go tick, 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 tick,
Right.
tick, 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 tick,
Yeah.
right?
Zipper its way up.
Yeah, over 127 steps, it was noticeable about how it steps. And then he went, okay, let's now put this in using MIDI 2 with the high resolution. And suddenly this thing is beautifully smooth up and down. And you sit there going, oh, it's just such a great demo of where stepping becomes a problem.
Right.
It's not always where you think it's going to be. There was that demonstration. And then the other one we had recently is we've obviously had the Roland A88, which was the first keyboard that announced that it was MIDI 2 support. And that came out years ago. But they've only just released the actual firmware that allows it to go into MIDI 2 mode. And there's reasons for that, mainly because they're waiting for the operating systems and so forth. We had this demo set up at NAMM, which was playing just piano going into Ivory 3, right?
Okay.
We had all these people come through, and I do not have the ear for it, but I had all these people come on through who were playing this piano going, I don't know what the key actual bit depth is, but it's using MIDI 2 velocity, which is 16-bit, so it's much, much higher resolution. And we had all these people come along and play who were composers and pianists and stuff like that, and they're going, we can absolutely hear the difference. And the reason that they could hear the difference, and we kind of figured out where this comes from, is that when you're playing with MIDI 1 and you can hear every little nuance, when you're playing at a certain velocity, the actual step range is not 0 to 127. It might only be 16 steps of difference, right? You can actually hear the kind of stepping when you're playing like that. When you start playing with the much higher resolution, that 16 boundary or 16 area of steps goes to several thousand. And so suddenly it's really about this, when you're in small bands of velocity, that you can really start to hear the variances properly. I'm tone deaf, and of course I'm not hearing it, and they're like raving on about it. I'm going, well, okay, and they're like,
fantastic.
But you've got to listen to this. So, you've got to really hear it. And I'm like, are you sure? Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, hooking into a really good plugin like Ivory 3 or something makes a big difference. I mean, it's got to come down to what you're connected to. But that made a huge difference, and people were like, I want this in my studio because it just gives that extra bit that they require when they're writing music that they're not going to get with their average controller keyboard or their standard MIDI 1 controller keyboard.
The feel.
Yeah, we kind of pushed Roland a little bit and said, get it out because it's, and they were like, yeah, okay, all right. So they got it, and I can't tell you what the feedback's been on it, but generally every time I stand on the stand at NAMM, it's just this amazing experience that people have who know their music.
Right.
which is great.
Well, I mean,
It's
'cause
really, really good.
something like that, I think, also comes down to, like I said, not only having all these masses of extra velocity levels, but where it's reading. So even if somebody doesn't necessarily hear the difference, somebody who's a pianist that sits down and plays, they feel it
Yes.
as well, right? So it's like this is responding the way I expect it to be if I sit down at a beautiful grand or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So instead of having X amount of samples that switch at every so often in the velocity curve, right now you have smaller increments as well. And I'm sure developers are going to take advantage of that as well and massively load up on their sample to probably get even more realistic control.
A RAID system for a single piano.
Right.
Yeah. And look, I mean, there's lots of other things too that even when you're talking about synthesizers and stuff like that, doing a filter sweep,
Yeah.
right? That's running from, I don't know what, 80 hertz or 20 hertz if it's really silly or whatever, right up to 20K. Even if you logarithmically step through that, you can hear it. And so there's all these things that I think are going to change. I don't think everyone's going to be like Nam. I don't think they're all going to stand up on the chair and go, oh my God, this is fantastic. But they're going to feel it.
Yeah.
And they're going to go, I'm not sure why this feels better, but I like it because it feels better.
Yeah.
And
I think for me, again, sorry to interrupt you, Andrew, but one of the most exciting things for me is what you just talked about with control surfaces and things. When you're dealing with the mix and you can feel that, and it's more fluid, shall we say. And then again, on the strictly personal thing, I think there's going to be a lot of things that are happening that I just can't think about now. And then it's like, oh my God, that's really, really cool.
In terms of having a mix controller like the SSL UF8 type thing, it goes back to the old days of consoles where they had an army of people practicing the mix moves. And there's a human element to that because they're not computerized, for one, and two, there's no stepping. And wherever the fader is, that's what it was giving in terms of resistance. That sends a signal that says, this is how loud it's going to be at this point. And if I turn that knob, that's the same deal. That's where I see 2.0 being pretty awesome in terms of mixing, is for things like the UF8, the UC1, those things that can take that really fine-grained control and it moves it back to playing a mixed control surface like you would an actual console and have it sound like an actual console, let alone doing the same thing with pianos. I'm assuming that with pianos and controllers, like I have what I think is a MIDI 2 capable controller, the Native Instruments S88 Mark II. Is that MIDI 2? No? You're shaking your head.
No.
But the aftertouch and other
that,
things like that, I imagine, because it's a weighted piano, and if there's a weighted piano controller that comes out that's MIDI 2.0 capable, not only is it reading how hard you've hit the key, but where your hand stays on the key afterwards, not only aftertouch, but where's the after feel? Because a real piano, when you hit it, the hammer hits off and then comes back down, I think. And then if you keep it pressed all the way down, the hammer's not going to fall all the way down. But depending on where you're hammering it and where you leave the key afterwards, I'm assuming that samples will eventually have that too.
Yeah. So quickly, the new Mark III of the Native Instruments one, it supports initial UMP, but it's only in MIDI 1 mode. So there's no direct benefit at this point. But I spoke to Native Instruments, and they have said, yes, they're going to have put in MIDI 2 protocol. They're just rolling it out over time, right? So just on what you're talking about with that kind of, again, expressibility. So one of those things is what we call built into the MIDI 2 protocol per channel is per note control. So all of those extra things we can do controls. One of the profiles that's being currently worked on is one called orchestral articulation. Now, I'm going to be a little bit cautious about what I say here in the sense, I'll caveat this with, I have not been directly involved with this working group. So
Got it. Yeah.
Okay, and I have read the specification, but I've read a lot of specifications and I can't remember everything. But the thing about that is that it allows, if you want to think about sample libraries, and they do lots of key switching and stuff like that. And the reason they do that is they'll say something like, oh, here's a violin library, but when you hit the key here, it's the bow up, and then when I hit the key over here, it's the bow down and stuff like that. So one of the things that they're now doing is that they're going to put that as part of the note on message, is have that extra bit of information in there for all those sample libraries, right? And so you can say, this note on is this note on, but it's actually doing all this. It's a note on in this way, right? It's got this mute going on. It's got this, a whole bunch of different articulations. And again, not my strong point. But that kind of stuff is stuff we really couldn't do very well in MIDI 1. So, and you've got to think about it. All those DAWs already have a lot of that information. You know, you can go to a note and you can set up the articulation, but now you can actually have it transmitted in a common way. And that's going to be very cool. And again, I don't think we've even looked at what that's going to come out with in the next couple of years.
So are you talking about now that potentially, let's say string libraries, because we're talking about strings.
Yeah.
So that there would be sort of like a standardization of the key switching, and there will be sent just here's installed. It's always going to be, or maybe there's no need to. I don't know.
There's no need to have a key switch because you can actually have that information in the note on. And so you can play your instrument and then you might go back, as opposed to saying, oh, I'll move that note to this other note down the thing. It's just, no, I just changed the articulation. Or maybe it might be that the playing surface allows you to choose the articulation as you're playing. Right? So there's a whole bunch of different, Right. So there's a whole bunch of things like that you put all these things in place, and the manufacturers will come to the market and go, actually, this is a much better way for us to move forward, and we're able to work with other people a lot more.
Wow.
Sounds amazing already, though.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I have a hard time actually wrapping my head around it until I actually see it and get to play with it and see what it's going. I'm sure there's going to be some magic going on there. So that's super interesting.
Here's something that comes to my mind. We've been talking a lot about drums and controllers for piano, strings, mixing surfaces. In terms of guitar, I have developed at one point a MIDI controller pedal that has a computer screen in it that shows me the software of what my computer guitar rig is doing. How much more difficult is it as somebody who is trying to write the information that happens in a controller, or something like a switcher for a guitar pedal that has on-off switches, knobs maybe, and real-time controller information going with it? What is the difference that's going to happen there? Resolution is obviously going to go much higher than 127, correct?
Yeah. Well, that's I think that's one thing, which I think will actually help pedals a lot.
Sure.
I think the configuration is going to help with pedals. I mean, I love playing around with pedals. I put synths into them and do all these things. And I don't know about you, every time I play with a pedal that's like, if it's a small pedal, it's always got these hidden functions. It's like, I will hold down this button, twist the knob, and it does something different.
Sure.
And I forget what they are all the time. Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have to dig through a manual and stuff like that. I think what you could have with that is something which is like a pedal management device, which would literally plug into all those pedals. And it could be, well, on this track, actually set the settings to these values, right? Because a lot of pedals don't have patches in them. And some, I know that more and more do, but they're kind of limited, or you can't, not easy to kind of tell which one was which. But maybe it might be patch management mixed in with some controller management, because they don't really need to have a full UI. They can just have a list of controllers, and then on one channel, it's quite easy. So you could just have something like that. And there's a few of those kinds of screen devices with controls on them and so forth. This is just off the top of my head as what I would do. I think the other thing that could be really good is that we could change the way that the transport is actually happening. We haven't really talked about that much. At the moment, we talk about how do you get the actual data across from one device to another. And we are looking at, it's one of the things that at the moment is that UMP, the only transport that's publicly available is USB. So you're going to have lots of USB cables or the rest of it. It's a one-to-one kind of connection. But in fact, actually, the thing that we're looking at the most is actually using network or Wi-Fi. Right?
MIDI over Wi-Fi?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been RTP MIDI. It's been around for a long time.
It doesn't seem like that would be very time consistent, though.
Well, within reason. Within reason. So, yes, it depends on the Wi-Fi, depends on a whole bunch of things. But if you're doing controller data, it's not heavy data. A bit of timing code and a bit of controller data, your mileage may vary. But the whole idea is that we can actually have a more consistent, smaller connection rather than two gigantic DIN plugs. Although I know that there's TRS as well. But on all your devices, you could have a network cable that goes into a box, a network hub that goes into one other box and does all those kinds of things. And it's all discoverable, so you can actually go and say, oh, what's all the different things on the network, and go and connect to it. That would be another thing that I think could help with a guitar rig like that, right? Again, because cabling is always a pain on guitar rigs and pedal boards and stuff like that. But I think there's probably the two benefits that I would see with that kind of improvement for MIDI 2 on that environment is you could probably daisy chain a bunch of network cables or something that has a central box that controls it all. And maybe it doesn't need to know about specific pedals. You could just literally plug in and go, oh, hang on, you've just plugged in that new pedal. How do you want to control it? What do you want to do with it?
Right.
I think when it comes to guitar players, unfortunately, you're in the present company here of two guitar players. As a stereotype, guitar players are notoriously sort of tech phobic. So I think any time that you're introducing something to a guitar player where you had to actually, God forbid, crack open a manual and do something, right? Read about something. It's like, no, I want my pedal analog. And, so I think that is probably a bigger hurdle as well. But as soon as somebody starts doing it, and as you're describing here with the way the two-way communication between gear, if that's there, I wonder if that's going to be sort of like an exploding market in the way of this, right? As far as like introducing MIDI again to guitar players, because I used to have my refrigerator rack and I had to just do a little bit of thinking to kind of get it to do what I wanted it to do. But a lot of players don't want that or didn't want that, but I think they were just scared. But
a little bit off topic here. It seems to me that pedals go in, and I'm not a pedal expert, but pedals go into two categories. Again, what you said, the traditional sort of very analog,
right.
Audio in, audio out, that's it. And then there's a lot of boutique pedals that tend to have these kinds of crazy, look at the Strymon stuff. I mean, they're all MIDI supported. The Chase audio stuff has all got MIDI on them. They're kind of hidden it with jacks and so forth, but they're all there. And some of their bigger pedals have actually got DIN ports on the back of them and so forth. So there is that kind of market for it. Whether that's 20% of the market of musicians who use them in that way or 10% or whatever. The big thing you've got to think about with a lot of pedals is timing clock, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of pedals now that support some kind of clock because you want to sync the delays or you want to sync all these different things that happen. Maybe that can be simplified, I don't know, or maybe it would be one of those things where something like having MIDI introduced again, as you say, is beneficial because you've kind of got that idea of you can actually have things in sync if you want them to be. And especially when you change tempo between tracks, you don't want to be fiddling with,
Right.
And tempo is good to a point, but sometimes it's like, oh, hang on, I don't really want to be tap tempoing this thing. But also I think in larger environments, it's different when you're playing at your local band, but if you're playing in a stage environment and you want all of that being controlled off stage,
Right.
you want them having less leads to trip over.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? So having that kind of ability to have all the different gear across the stage all being handled over network or some other transport like that kind of really starts to have some benefits.
Everything is synced to the click that the drummer is using.
Exactly.
Well, to that end, when you say that, what I'm thinking in terms of a question is SMPTE has a certain resolution. I'm going to guess that MIDI 2.0's resolution is much higher than SMPTE. Is that correct?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so it's
So
going to be
most MIDI
roughly similar or eventually
No, it will be
better?
much higher. So we're just starting to get into a lot of time domain stuff. So you've got normal MIDI clock, which is the same as MIDI 1. It's 24 parts per quarter or whatever it is off the top of my head. There is a whole bunch of stuff to do with stuff that we're looking at the moment as far as getting much higher resolutions in terms of SMPTE, but it will be done, don't know when. There's a lot of unfortunate things in front of it at the moment. That being said, if there's a big push from people to actually ask for that, I would suggest they get onto the MIDI.org website, go to the forums and say, these are the things that we would like to see in MIDI 2. We actually actively watch a lot of those things and we do respond where we can. But I would really suggest...
Go respond, Mr. Listener or Mrs. Listener.
Feedback. I mean, this is not the MIDI Association of many years ago. We're a far more open organization and we do a lot more outreach to try and actually go, hey, we're here. We want to work with you as musicians. We want to work with you and collaborate and understand what your needs are. And I think it's a real kind of shift in a lot of respects. And part of that is, we're talking 5 years now, but the refresh of the MIDI.org website, which was a big deal, the first sort of foray into let's actually work with people who aren't just the manufacturing companies. Let's actually work with people and hear what they have to say and go and talk to people. There's a lot more work in that respect that's been going on. So yes, getting back to what you're saying, if there's things you think are important to you or going to be important to the future, get on there and talk about it because it actually does affect our priorities.
Right.
Okay. That makes good sense.
Yeah. Maybe we'll put a link in the show notes there, maybe for people, if they have an idea, they can go in and drop a comment or something. But yeah. It sounds really exciting to me. I mean, to me, it feels like a little bit into, okay, let's grab a sword and a torch and see what's coming up, and
well, it's almost like Tron. And then Tron 2 Legacy. Tron was very much MIDI 1, and Tron Legacy is where MIDI 2 is going.
But will we still be limited to 16 channels?
No. Okay, so that was part of the other things that I didn't actually get into. So one of the things that UMP has is 256 channels per...
That's it.
Connection. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of channels, right?
I'm joking. Yeah,
I know.
Right.
Yeah. Although I do feel like someone's going to fill it up just to prove a point. But the way that interestingly works is you actually can break that up into what we call function blocks. So we're getting into the nerdy side of things here. But the way that happens is, say you have a device like a controller keyboard or like a all-in-one kind of keyboard and sound and
workstation
and so
type
forth.
of thing.
Workstation,
Sure.
yeah. And you might say, oh, well, the workstation has 32 channels of actual sounds. And so what you do is you break that up into one function block in this group of 256 channels. And then you might say, oh, the DAW control is on another function block of 16 channels. And the keyboard itself is a different function block that could be on any channel. And the reason we do that, instead of having different ports, which is the way that they kind of used to do it over USB, is that you can actually kind of move them around to match the other device that you're talking to. Because we talk a lot about DAW control. DAW is talking to hardware units, and they're adaptable. They can just be like, well, what have you got? We'll adapt. If you'll start talking about the fact that we actually, a big part of MIDI is, I have this device and I have this device. There's no computer in the middle, right? We don't want to lose that. We still want people to be able to go, you know what? I'm just going to plug the two in and they work.
Right.
There's work to be done on that, but that's one of the things that we actually have in mind. So you can say, well, my keyboard is using these particular channels, actual keyboard that I press the keys and make notes, but my sound generation's on some other different set of channels. Let's move where that keyboard's like changing channels effectively. But let's match what the other side tells us it has. And so it's this kind of way of, again, part of the description, but it's this real sort of breaking up the 256 channels So as opposed to having one lot of 256 channels, but I'm only using one channel, and another lot of 256 channels, but I'm only using 16 of them, you can break them up to kind of not have to create multiple connections.
Interesting.
Smart.
Yeah.
We really want to try and make sure that the user is not having to understand that at an in-depth level, right?
Right.
And so it's that real thing about, oh, well, I've discovered it, and now I know what it is. Something can automate all that stuff, or at least tell the user, do you want to match? Oh, yes, I do. Okay. And then it goes and matches.
Right.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's a lot of things to take in there. But it's just the possibilities, and I think that you're describing all these technologies that are getting worked at and worked on. That a whole bunch of new functionality is going to reveal itself once people sort of get their hands on it. It's like, oh my God, wouldn't it be cool if I could do this? Or now that I can do this, I'm going to use it in another way that it might not be intended, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be a very fascinating development and see what it actually does and how people intend to use it or how they end up using it.
And I think for those developers that are actually out there, one of the things to remember is don't try and do everything. Right? There is so much that you could do. Don't try and do everything. Just start with one thing.
One thing.
And we see this with, let's talk about the Native Instruments when they put their product up. And again, they've just gone, well, we're just going to implement UMP. We won't do anything else just yet. We'll do that. And then they will add more and more as they have customer demand, and they have use cases that match their product.
Right.
A good, interesting one was called Keystage. And we talk about this whole concept of devices talking to each other and telling an interrogation and then property exchange stuff. And they went, you know what? As opposed to us waiting for some other software to do it, we'll just do it as the communication between our products. So they've got their OP6 native and their WaveState native standalone synth products and then the Keystage talks to that, right? And so the Keystage connects and goes, okay, I'm just normal Keystage. Oh, do you have that stuff? Yes, I do. And then suddenly it actually goes off and talks to it using the same thing. So normally that would have been done using some kind of non-standard way of doing it. So they've done it. They've gone, well, let's just do it in the standard way. And the beauty about that is we've got other products that come along now. There's a product called WoodSynth, which is done by this single developer. He does it as a hobby, right? Soft synth, and he does iOS and Mac stuff and stuff like that. So he just does it as a hobby. He's not, I shouldn't say hobby, but it's certainly not, it's not his main income or whatever, right? So he took what the Keystage did in the standard way, and he got his software to work with the Keystage.
Nice.
Now, the beauty about that is that, okay, it works with the Keystage does that. If something else comes along and uses MIDI CI, he doesn't need to do any extra programming for that other device. He just goes, well, it works, it does what it needs to do. Or maybe it might be some other software that talks to his software across virtual cables or something. It does what it's supposed to do. It interrogates his software. The software tells that these are the controllers I use. And so if you use the Keystage with his software, it appears like the Korg software where all the labels are for the particular controls and it paginates and stuff like that. I'm still trying to get myself a Keystage here because I want to do some extra testing with it. Nice. And he was part of the people, as my role as the developer support working group chair was to reach out to, he's not a MIDI association member, to reach out to and say, hey, do you need help? And he said, oh, yes, please, thanks. And we had a good conversation. We provided tools because we do a lot of providing of tools in the MIDI association.
That's what you mentioned at NAMM, that there's a lot of information for developers that's like, here, try this out. This is the way we suggest that you do it, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and so there's this whole thing where it's just do one thing. And now he's like, well, I can do this extra thing now. And I can do this extra thing, and I can just roll it out in my own time. And Korg doing something similar where it's just like, oh, well, we've got these things working for WaveState native and stuff. Let's put that in our new ModWave version 2 or whatever it is that they released, the hardware. It's a hardware unit. So you can get the Keystage and literally connect your over 5-pin DIN two-way, and the Keystage does exactly what you were talking about wanting it to do before, which is it detects the device, device tells it what to do, and it appears on the Keystage and it's done.
Nice.
So this is what we're trying to get to, is that exactly the thing. Now, again, Korg did it with their own products, but there's no other reason that no one else can't write a product and do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So the hard question becomes, how soon, aside from this key stage, are we going to start seeing 2.0 really take off?
We already are.
Okay.
And this is what I was talking about with evolution. So NAM, because of the COVID and stuff, has literally been having NAM every 9 months.
Right.
The NAM prior to this one, I had one demo product, really, commercial product, which was the A88. We actually had a key stage, an unbadged key stage on there, which we said, oh, it's doing stuff, but we weren't allowed to talk about what it was called or anything like those lines.
No.
And like we had all these Korg people coming up to us going, we haven't seen one yet. It was great. But
I'll show you, but I'll have to kill you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's it called? I can't tell you that. I'm really sorry, So we had a couple of demos. We had, at that point, Logic had just released their MIDI 2 high resolution support. That was it. That was it. We had demos and stuff like this. This NAM, we had 3 keyboards. We had a whole bunch of software. Most of the operating systems covered. I think Windows is the one that's still in progress at the moment, but they had already released a whole bunch of stuff publicly that you can test if you want to run developer builds of Windows 11 and stuff like that. Had on the back of the board, we had all these posters of all different products.
Right. Yeah.
They're actually all MIDI 2 products. And we missed a couple. Like there was things that we found out, like we didn't know about all of the Korg hardware synths until we'd got to NAM. All right. And then we also found out that the Waldorf Iridium has also got support. I mean, they're not a MIDI Association member, but that's all that it's in beta or something. We were trying to find out more about it at the show and we didn't see the right people, but we've spoken to them since. I have people that email me and go, oh, look, we're working on this. It's not for public knowledge yet.
Yeah.
Right. So I would imagine by the time we...
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, that's what you put in the beep, right? You know that beep?
Right, exactly. We got so and so and so and so and so.
Yeah, so, yeah.
That's when Jody and I asked surprise. Oh my God, I can't believe it.
Yeah. But the thing is that the one difference about MIDI 2 versus what's been sort of proposed in the past and stuff like that is it's supported by the Japanese companies. And you want to think about Japanese companies, especially in the synth market and all the rest of it, is 80% of the industry, hands down, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where they are all on board and they're all working on, they either have products coming out or they have them out or they will have them out. Some of the things that they're working on is very, very cool. Some of them are, I won't say anything further than that. But the point I'm trying to make, without getting into trouble, because I will, is that it has the support and backing by the industry.
Sweet.
There's been other MIDI things that have come along in the past, like replacements for MIDI 1 in the past, if you want to look at things along that lines. Even within the MIDI Association, they've been working on stuff for years and years and years. That this is actually the result of a lot of those things, and it's actually got the backing. So, as I said to you, when you ask when, it's a bit like the question of like, how long is a piece of string? The point is that yes, it is.
It's imminent. It sounds like. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be a gradual thing, and then it's going to explode. Right?
Yeah, and I think what you will find is that each NAM that you go to, it's going to be more and more of people going, "Oh yeah, our product supports MIDI 2."
Great.
In some way.
Yes.
And then what it will be, it'll be less of the question will be, "Are you still supporting MIDI 1?" And that's not a bad thing. If your product only needs to support MIDI 1, so that's fine. There's no issues with that. But if you're sitting there going, well, my product has got lots of expressivity, you might be sitting there going, well, are you really, supporting that? Are you giving your customers that option to be high resolution if that's what they want? And if you're getting customers that are buying your product because of expressivity, then they're going to be wanting higher resolution.
Of course.
It's a gradual shift. And I don't blame a lot of companies because development work is hard, laborious, slow, and expensive.
Right.
So it's going to be...
But that's why you have sort of like the giants that are, when they're on board, because they're the ones that have the resources to allocate
Exactly.
to this, right? And
Well,
sort of
and
drive the industry forward.
And part of that is, we touched on this a bit earlier, is that the members of the MIDI Association are supplying open source code, open source tools, and they're all under very permissive, commercially permissive licenses because we recognize that this is a jump. MIDI 1, you can get away with a lot of stuff and it's not super complicated. UMP by itself is not complicated, but you are putting in things that has never been done in MIDI. We're asking companies to make that jump. So how do we make that easier for them? There's C++ libraries that have been provided by members, including myself and Franz Dietro from Native Instruments. We have the MIDI Workbench, which is part of the work that I do, was sponsored by Yamaha, which is, here's a tool that you can plug into your MIDI device and it will tell you everything you're doing wrong. And everything you should be doing right and how to fix it. But it is, right. But that is really important. And, we send out, the tool's publicly available. It works with all of the current specifications that are publicly available. We have one for members, a version that's meant for members that has the upcoming specifications, because MIDI Association has very strict rules about releasing specifications before they're ready.
Right.
But we provide all of this stuff, including one of the things that we've got is how to build your USB descriptors for MIDI 2. And if you've ever had to build USB descriptors, like when you plug your USB device in, right, there's a whole bunch of communication that says, I'm this kind of device. And if you've ever had to build that, there are so many ways they can go wrong. And so we've provided a whole bunch of tools and libraries. There's a product by Amanote called Protozoa, and it's actually a dev board, so people can test with a whole bunch of code that they can test embedded development just to make sure it works, right? And here's a whole bunch of examples of how you would do this or how you would do that. Again, because it speeds up development. If we can chop 6 months off someone's development time, that's a huge
cost
benefit.
savings. Yeah.
Yeah. And ideally, we want good products out there. We want products that use the specification correctly, do the right thing, a good MIDI citizen, as they say, right?
Right.
Why not have it so people can actually do that? And we're looking at developers that range, as I said, from single developers right through to massive companies. We only deal with big companies. We find that small developers are great because they can develop rapidly.
Right.
And
quite possibly think in a different pattern of somebody that's used to operating in a certain way, right?
That's right. They don't have the overheads that's like, I sat down for a weekend and a couple of weekends and I converted all my software over to MIDI 2 and it was no big deal. Right?
That would be nice.
And that's the messaging we want. It's not going to happen in a big company because they've got, QA and a whole bunch of other things and they have these big libraries that they work with. That's fine. But here's a bunch of stuff that just helps. It's been a really good experience because I've had everyone come by who's gone, thank goodness for this. It's really saved a lot of time. and then I've had the other end of experiences where people have been like, please don't contact me. I don't like the MIDI Association, but it's been
Ouch.
It's like, they don't provide any help. That's why I'm calling you. But that's, and that's fine. It's the industry. But we've had a lot of really good excitement, We have lots of people who are super excited. And we do get lots of people who had for the last couple of years. It's interesting at NAMM. I've been on the booth for a couple of years now. And the questions were, why should we do it? What benefit has it? We don't think this is, a couple of negative, but, we'll look at it. We don't think this is going to really displace MIDI 1. And I'm like, it doesn't have to displace MIDI 1. That's not the point. That's why we made
enhancing
it's not a separate thing. And then suddenly this last year, the questions were different, right? The questions were, oh, yes, how do we do X, Y, Z? Mm-hmm. What should I be doing and putting in my product? What resources can you provide? I got a couple of what is MIDI 2, because that's what happens.
Sure.
But getting a lot more very directed questions about any of the musicians saying, well, okay, I've heard lots about it. What's going to really help me?
Yeah.
Thinking in terms of all these pieces of gear, for you, what is your favorite piece of gear that you can't live without?
I love the looping. I actually have, which is will probably not benefit as much from MIDI 2, but I'm a big fan of the Boss RC505 loopers.
What about
That's my
Ed
gear. That's my
Sheeran
gear
one?
that I can't live without at the moment. That and my Synthstrom Deluge.
Okay.
Fair enough. The next one there, what's your biggest lesson that you've learned in your journey when it comes to your career?
Patience. Lots of patience. I've worked generally in situations where I've been able to move very rapidly, and the people we work with is fantastic, I have to say. I've got a lot of time for them, but things take time. That's probably the biggest thing that I've learned.
Patience is always a good thing.
What advice do you universally give to others?
Test and don't be afraid to fail. And if it's failed, speak up. Because that is one of those things where we did a lot of work in the association. Lots of things were decided upon, and then we tested and we failed. Right. And we made it better because we could actually look at it, and people don't speak up about that at all. And I welcome people who go, I tried this and I didn't get it to work. This is why. This is what I think we should do instead. And you go, great, you've learned. I have no trouble with that at all. And I really welcome people to try. I hear some people go, I'm so afraid of failing, I won't even try in the first place.
Yikes.
That's pretty universal, I think, whatever you're doing in life. So don't be afraid of failing. You can suck at the moment, but you generally end up learning something.
Yeah,
That's right.
On that note, I think we're going to thank you very much for your time here, Andrew. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure Jody has too, and hopefully our listeners as well, unless they're a lot smarter than I am, which could very well be true.
All right, we're going to move on to a segment we call Friday Finds. And we'll start with Chris by saying, what have you learned this week, Chris?
Well, I've just learned a lot the last hour and a half here, but my Friday find is a piece of music. You remember the band Duran Duran, and they had a guitar player called Andy Taylor.
Yep.
He just recently came out with another solo album, and it's really, really, really good. I listened to it, the songwriting, the production, everything. It's called Man's a Wolf to Man. Go check it out. It is really, really good. Jody, what have you got?
I'm going with a plugin called Crush. This is by a company called TrickTik, Trikttik. It is a free bit crusher plugin. They also have a pro version as well. And for those that need bit crushing, this plugin does it extremely well. Crush by TrickTik is my pick for this week.
Should we ask Andrew? Is there anything that you'd like to bring up that you've discovered this Friday? We're putting you on the spot here, so
You are definitely putting me on the spot. I'm trying to think. Now you've put me on the spot. Everything's gone blank.
I've learned that I'm never going to go on podcasts again. Right?
Yeah. I'm always learning things every day, but anything particular, I have to be honest. I'm not sure. I've learned that there's some very skilled people out there who make some amazing music. I've been watching, I was talking about the looping before, I've been watching all of the loop station for the GBB24, which I know is not in for a lot of people, but it amazes me how people can make something with their voice and be so crazy with their sounds that it throws me. It is amazing to watch. If you're just watching it for the music, you probably just go, meh, whatever. But knowing that people are doing that and building it on the fly and have to build it on the fly is just quite amazing. That to me is the stuff that I've been learning is like, how do they do it? And I've been sitting down watching lots of videos to try and figure out how they do it. And I still can't figure out how they do something. So I've got to give them lots of kudos for that.
Nice.
Right on. While we've got your attention, we ask that you go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for our mailing list. You'll need to be on our email list in order to be eligible for any future giveaways. And we'll make sure you don't miss any future episodes of this awesome podcast. Send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the phrase MIDI 2.0, and you'll get something cool back in your inbox. If you have a topic or suggestion for Chris and I to explain in a future episode, contact us at the contact page and we'll put it into consideration for a future episode. With that, I'll say see you next week.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you, Andrew. I'll talk to you later, Jody.
Thank you.